So Ray wanted to start. So Ray, you start.
Okay. I wanted to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be able to spend my 75th birthday with so many people who have been such good friends and such good colleagues over a period of so many years. When I was thinking about what to say, when I formulated that opening, I thought, how many years is it exactly? So I decided to make a sort of timeline of when I met people and where, to the best I could recollect, and how long I've known them. And the results were kind of a little surprising to me in certain cases. I I wish I knew how to like blow up each of you as I referred to you, but I don't. I tried to look at it in Google this morning, and I thought, no, it's too much for a man of my age.
I think you might be able to do it by clicking on their picture, Ray, but I don't know.
I don't know. I don't want to play
Okay.
with it. I don't want to.
All
play
right.
with it. So
Fine.
anyway, I've known Ken since 1980, which means I've known Ken for 40 years, or more than half of my entire adult life.
Hmm.
I've known Maxine. Maxine waved because not everybody knows who you are. Yes, that's Maxine, is the person who's waving. I think we met in 1982. Is that the right year?
It is.
1982, when she came to work at the Adult Gender Identity Clinic at what was then the Clark Institute of Psychiatry. So I've known Maxine for 38 years. Mike, I met in 1991 at Barry, but we had spoken on the phone before we ever met. So I'm going to say that we probably first met each other, at least on phone anyway, around 1990, which means that I've known you for 30 years, or the greater part of my adult life. It seems odd when you think about it. Tony, I met, I think, in 1991. You were still in graduate school, and I think it was a couple of years, I think it was 2 years before you actually started your postdoc.
Correct. Yeah.
So that means I've known Tony for 29 years, which is amazing.
Mhm.
James, everybody knows James, but do something, James, to get attention, something out of your behavioral repertoire.
Sing something.
I've known James
on NPR yesterday.
I've known James since he first came as a clinical intern for his PhD. I think in '98, although he might have come a year before then to interview. I don't know that, but I'm going to say I've known James since '98, which is 22 years. Paul, I probably met in 2000 at Minot. Does that sound right to you? Okay. So we've known each other for 20 years, which is quite a while. Doug, I met, you were still an undergraduate. You hadn't gone out to Lethbridge yet. I'm sure of that. And so I'm figuring that I met you around 2004, which would mean we've known each other for 16 years. Does that seem about right to you? Oh, I'm not getting sound from you.
Sure, unmute.
Sorry, I muted because there was some vacuuming in the background. We met in 2006 in Amsterdam at ISR, and I was just near the end of my first year of my master's with Paul.
No, really? I thought I met you before. I never met you as an undergraduate before you went out to Lethbridge.
I don't think so.
That's funny. I have that memory that I met you before you went out, but
I had that same memory.
How long was my hair?
You had more of it.
yeah,
I had more of it, but how much more of it?
And was
significantly more of it.
he stoned?
Or I had it to here.
No, it was not down to there. I would have remembered that.
It wasn't 2004.
All right then. Okay, 2006. So I'm off by a couple of years there. Amy, I'm guessing 2007. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I very briefly met you in the hallway in Ottawa in 2005, but it was when I interviewed for internship when we actually had a conversation.
Okay, all right, 2005. So I've known you for 15 years, which is amazing. Somewhere in here must be Kevin. Where are you, Kevin?
Right here, Ray.
You were still an undergraduate when I met you, right?
I was. I believe that we met at IESR in Los Angeles in 2011, my very first IESR.
Okay, 2011. So I never met you before then in Evanston?
I know that you came to Evanston a couple of times, but I think that was after that IESR. I guess, Mike, you would be able to corroborate that. But I know that we took a few walks along.
There was Ray came before then, but that was before you were there, I think,
okay.
or before you were very
Okay.
involved.
So that brings us up to Malvina.
What about Tony? Did you say Tony?
I did. Tony, I've known since 1991 because we met a couple times. I think we met 2 successive years when we were applying to Shirk for postdoctoral fellowships. And then I think he finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, we made 2 applications, and the second time we got it. And then I think he came in 93.
Yeah, that's correct. Right?
Yeah, Malvina, I'm guessing maybe 2013, because I don't think you started on the serology project. I think Tony waited a couple of years before activating the grant, because you went on a sabbatical, right?
I think we did take some time to actually get this underway. Malvina came on board, I think perhaps the second year or the third year that we started it, Ray. So I think that timing makes some sense. We did some preliminary stuff, but certainly in terms of jump-starting the whole project, Malvina was so important to that, that I would say that she was, a big initiator in terms of, helping to start up the wet lab at Brock. Oh my God, it was so daunting. And
Ray,
so helpful. Yes.
I think I still have your email from when we collected the first sample.
Oh my God.
I kept it because, well, for various reasons, but let's not go into that. I think that was in 2011 we collected the first sample.
Really?
December 2011, yeah.
Because I could have sworn that the grant was awarded in 2010, and then Tony went off for a sabbatical. But if you recollect you were there and I wasn't. So if you say 2011, that's more likely right than me.
I have to find this email now. I know I have it somewhere.
Anyway.
But I don't know if I met you in person in 2011 though.
No, I'm sure.
In person, I actually don't remember. But definitely the first sample, I'm fairly certain was collected in 2011.
Yeah, it was probably you. Anyway, so you're in the neighborhood of 9 years, which is still something.
Is Tony ever not on sabbatical?
You should try it, Ken. It's really cool.
He takes the inverse of sabbaticals in between the sabbaticals, the anti-sabbaticals. Scott, I would have met at a conference for the first time, I think. Where are you, Scott?
Oh, I'm here. I think we met in Charleston in the hotel lobby.
What year was that?
In 2017.
2017?
Yeah.
So you weren't at IASR in Toronto?
I think I was, but I don't think that we met. I think I was probably too green behind the ears and snot-nosed, if I am not still those things, and too scared to meet you.
Wet behind the ears.
Oh,
Too green or too wet behind the ears?
I have you down for 2015 because I assumed that I would have at least been introduced by Paul, but okay, in that neighborhood. So I've known you for either 3 or 5 years. And the one person whom I have not yet met, but with whom I've corresponded, is Francisco. Where are you? Wave, Francisco, so that people who don't know you will see who you are.
Cisco, this is me.
Hmm?
Yeah, the first email would have been like in 2017 when we started talking about the Musha data and the birth order stuff.
Right, okay.
Francisco, how old are you, Francisco?
I am 27.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
So-
the longevity of Ray's interest influence, which I think will triple over time.
I think 27 is the age that Tony was when he started his postdoc with me, when we started collecting the big birth order study.
I was just realizing that I am now the age you were when we met.
Yeah.
Scares the fucking shit out of me.
Yes. Yeah, I have something else to say on that head, not specifically about you. Anyway, so I have known you people for a large part of my life, and certainly a very, very large part of my working life. And I sort of consider the part of my life prior to sex research as being a kind of pointless prologue, but it did exist. So it's really nice to have you all here today. A very good feeling. Since today's my birthday, I wanted to make 2 wishes. Now I have to remember what they are. One of them was
that makes 3.
You're right. Okay. One of them is that for those of you who are younger, I hope that in the future you will remember me with something like the amount of fondness that I remember Kurt Freund, who was the person who got me involved in sex research. I met him in 1978 approximately, and I knew him until his death in 1996. So I knew Kurt about 18 years. Roughly related to what James said, when I met Kurt Freund, I think he was not quite 65, and he seemed like Methuselah to me. And it's amazing for me to think that I'm 10 years older than Kurt was when I first met him. Now, Kurt was completely bald and he kind of had gaunt features, so maybe he was an old-looking 65. He certainly did not look like some, jolly tanned plump suburbanite bouncing off the golf links. But still, it's a weird thought for me that I'm 10 years older now than Kurt was when I met him. That is strange. So aside from my wish that you'll all remember me with some degree of fondness, and I won't do anything to fuck that up between now and my demise, I also want to say that for those of you who are still working, and that's everybody but Maxine, who had the good sense to stop working when she hit 65, I hope that you'll forge on in sex research. It's not always the easiest place to work. Not only because of kind of chronic problems. Well, everybody moans about they don't have enough grant monies. Everybody thinks that their field should have more grant monies than it gets, but also because of the incessant interference and pressure from politics that we all experience. And I say all, I think that everybody on this call has experienced some kind of pressure from politics, if only at the level of having to modify how you might express yourself, or what topics you might want to talk about with your students, or what research projects you might want your students to do. And some of us on this call have had extreme traumatic and damaging experiences because of politics. So I just hope that there won't be any defectors, and that you'll all keep doing sex research at least part-time throughout your careers, so that someday when you're 75, you can look back and say, well, I hung in there, as aversive as it was at times. So that concludes my prepared remarks.
All right, thank you, Ray. That was very entertaining. Clarification. You said when did you meet Kurt?
It was in the late 70s.
And when did Kurt die?
96.
Okay, so yeah, you were associated for a long time.
Yeah, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
At the job that I was at, this was a place called the Ontario. This was my first full-time permanent job. It was at a prison, actually, in Brampton, Ontario, called the Ontario Correctional Institute. And Kurt was working at the Clark, but he used to consult there three half days a week because it was a good source of, it was an income, partial income for him, but he also recruited subjects there. Anyway, the chief psychologist that I worked for did not want me talking to Kurt Freund. He never said that, but I could always tell from his reaction that he didn't want me having anything to do with Kurt Freund. For whatever reason, I don't know. But one day, one of the other psychologists that I worked with, another one of the renegade actors, said to me, I talked to this guy, that Freund guy. He's really interesting. You should go and talk to him. So, and the psychologist who said this to me knew that I was bored and depressed. And I mean, working in a lockup as just a regular psychologist is not any great pleasure. So he suggested I go and talk to Kurt, that it might be stimulating to me. So I made an appointment with Kurt to speak with him and ask him about his research, ask him about phallometric testing, stuff like that. We talked for about an hour. And by the end of the hour, we were making plans to do some research together. And that hour, that moment, was literally the first time in my life that it ever crossed my mind that I would have any involvement whatsoever in doing research in sexual behavior, human or animal. Now, I was already, I guess approaching 30, and I had never before that time ever thought about being involved in sex research. At the time, my ambition was, it would be nice sometime if I could publish 1 or 2 papers. And that is, honest to God, what the scope of my ambition was at that point.
Ray, why don't you tell people who your subjects were for your PhD thesis?
Well, they were pigeons. My subjects for my PhD thesis were 8 pigeons, some of whom I liked and some of whom I didn't. I don't know what to say. Pigeons have this behavior called defensive diarrhea, which does not necessarily make them very attractive to deal with.
I may adopt that strategy.
In fact, I think they should have used it at the presidential debates.
I had started graduate school at University of Illinois in clinical psychology, and I didn't like it. And after 2 years, I switched out of clinical psychology and finished off in experimental, which with a specialty in learning and motivation, a field which has subsequently disappeared, collapsed. I don't think hardly anybody is doing Skinner box experiments with pigeons or rats anymore, maybe somewhere as a way of testing drug effects or something. But anyway, so I switched from humans to pigeons, and then I did my postdoc with pigeons. So I did 3 years of postdoc with pigeons, and then I decided I didn't like pigeons any better than people. And so things were a little rough then. And then I moved to Toronto with no clear idea of what I was going to do at all. And I got my first job in a lockup because no psychologist wants to work in a lockup. People don't like working in lockups. It's not especially pleasant. And that was what led me to sex research.
Well,
Ray,
we're kind of in a lockup now. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to ask, what did you study with clinical psychology when you started that was so aversive that you had to move to pigeons?
Well, it was at University of Illinois. which back in those days was considered one of the leading behavior therapy. And this is pre-cognitive behavior therapy. This was the original behavior therapy. Skinner and Len Ullman, Gordy Paul, they were my teachers. And they could make clinical psychology and psychopathology as boring as any human beings could possibly make any topic. They literally, to whatever extent they could plausibly manage it, they really tried to teach us that we were to treat people as if we were training up pigeons or laboratory rats. That was their literal approach to clinical work. They made a few concessions to reality. Even back in those days, one of the things that clinical psychologists were expected to do was IQ testing. So one of the courses I had in the second year was driving out to schools and giving IQ tests to kids. And then they would have somebody observe us and go over our sins with us. And I will never forget, the clinic at University of Illinois was not on the main campus. It was somewhere out in a cornfield. You had to drive there. So basically you had to have a car. And I remember one day I had to get up, it was pouring rain, drive from the campus out to this cornfield to meet with my advisor, who said, "You said put the black buttons in this box. You were supposed to say put the black buttons in that box." And I was just sitting there thinking, I got up to drive in the fucking pouring rain to hear that I said this box instead of that box. And I had therefore broken standardization. So that was what clinical psychology was like. And I thought, and I was so bored with it. And then I had started working on my master's, doing lab work with animals, and I just liked being in the lab. I liked wearing blue jeans instead of a coat and tie. It was getting towards the high point of the summer of love. Everybody was a hippie. All of that was just much more attractive to me than this uptight coat and tie, I'm going to modify your behavior kind of thing, which now nobody does anymore, I don't think. But then, as I said, after that, I didn't like, I really wasn't that fond of doing animal learning research. It had just been a place I escaped to as less aversive than clinical psychology, but it wasn't something I had any passionate desire to do.
And Ray, I think you told me a story about your PhD supervisor's behavior during your defense.
Yeah. I got my PhD supervisor so mad at me that he did not attend my final defense. He just didn't come.
You want to tell us why you got him that, Ray?
Defensive diarrhea.
I was really nasty in retrospect.
You weren't unprofessional at all, were you?
I was horrible now that I think about it. I mean, he had, in those days, it's hard to explain this to you, but people didn't have computers. We would buy equipment, which consisted of relays and these boards that you programmed not with a keyboard, but you programmed by plugging wires from one place into another. And you didn't just buy this stuff. You bought the components. You bought these switches, and you would wire up something, for example, to count from 1 to 10. You would actually, using switches that were either on or off, you had to know how to wire up switches that could count from 1 to 10 or could change conditions. That was how you wrote a program. So, and I liked that. And I had gotten a reputation for being good at that. And I had a research assistantship where I was building equipment. And I liked that. I liked soldering. I enjoyed that kind of stuff. So he hired me he was a young assistant professor. Oh my God, he might listen to this now. But I'll have to tone it down a little. So anyway, he hired me to like build his lab because he was just starting as an assistant prof. So he bought $30,000 worth of this stuff. $30,000 in those days was like 3 million now, but it was all in the forms of individual switches, right? And so I was supervising at one point up to 5 people building the equipment. And he gave me shit because he didn't think I was supervising the people who were building the equipment thoroughly enough. And he had just not gotten tenure. And for me, the fact that he dumped on me as a graduate student the job of building an entire lab and supervising the building of a lab when I was a PhD student trying to get my own PhD. I mean, I had to wait until 10 or 11 at night to start running my own animals because his were run earlier in the day. So when he gave me shit about, I wasn't supervising the assistants enough, I lost it. So time came for my final defense and he wasn't there.
I assume he has signed the form though.
He did sign. Well, it was ghosted because as an assistant prof, he had to have someone ghost it.
Okay.
Anyway, but so I was nasty as hell. On the other hand, I was under such stress. And I mean, it's true that I had all this responsibility. I mean, I wasn't trained as an electrical engineer. What did I know? I mean, in retrospect, I built the thing in a very unsafe way. It should have been built in an idiot-proof way. I built it in such a way you could make connections that would blow the thing up. I should not have done it that way, but I didn't know enough. Later, when I thought back about it, I
Or
thought,
maybe you did.
But I got my PhD.
Well, he wouldn't be able to do that in 2020 and take advantage of his power to exploit you. So.
No, it would. I mean, yeah, it was just. Yeah, by today's standards, what happened was out of the question. But they didn't treat graduate students like little princes and princesses at University of Illinois in those days. It was rugged. And
that's recent.
What, treating them like princes and princesses?
Yeah. Yep. You hear that, youngsters?
What I heard is there are no youngsters here.
Well, no, that's not true. There are people as young as 27. That's pretty young.
I overlooked them entirely.
At your age.
Sure, rub it in.
So Ray, where did you meet Ken? Tell us about that.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
Excuse
Okay,
me.
we're gonna transfer to the next part of this. Thanks. And what we're going to start with with the oldest friendships, and then go down to the youngest. And each person is going to say a few words. And, I think that will answer your question, Paul, because Ken is first. So go ahead, Ken.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll tell a few old stories about Ray. So I was a graduate student at the Clark Institute of Psychiatry in the Child and Adolescent Gender Clinic starting in 1976. And Ray said we met in 1980. I was still a graduate student when he was hired in the Adult Gender Identity Clinic. And at that point, I had actually been asked to apply for the job Ray got in the adult clinic, and I'm really glad that I didn't get it. And then a year later, I was hired as the psychologist in the child clinic. So I'll tell you a few old stories about Ray. The first story that I think is kind of interesting is to tell you about our first adventure together at the International Academy of Sex Research in 1983 in Harriman, New York, which was at the estate of the Harriman family. And my main memory is that we played a lot of pool at that meeting, and we slept in the same bed, which is kind of frightening in retrospect. And then
Ray.
The next story is the story of how we published this book, Gender Dysphoria, in 1985, which was edited by Betty Steiner, who was the psychiatrist who founded the Adult Gender Clinic. And Betty somehow had gotten a contract with this obscure publisher to prepare an edited book, Charles C. Thomas. Anybody know what city Charles C. Thomas is in? Springfield, Illinois. And there's no period after the C in Charles C. Thomas. Of course, just like Ray's PhD supervisor oppressed him, Ray actually had to edit the book. Betty was a psychiatrist who did not engage in manual labor. Anyways, we submit the book, which had 2 chapters by Ray, a big one by Kurt. I had a really big chapter. The psychiatrist John Hernig had a couple of chapters. Anyways, the publisher returned the book unread because it was way too long. At which point, Ray did what Ray usually does, which is to catastrophize. And he wrote a letter of resignation that he was going to give to Betty Steiner. And I said, Ray, hold on, I have an idea. So I had become friendly with Richard Green by 1984, which was around the time we submitted it. And Richard was the series editor of a Plenum Press series called Perspectives in Sexuality. And so I decided I would approach Richard to see if we could interest him in taking on the book. No problem, accepted as is. And the rest is history. Then another memory I have of Ray is we were at the 1987 IASR meeting in Tutzing, Germany, West Germany at the time. And on our way back, we had to stay over a night in Munich. And we were really excited because there was a McDonald's down the street. So we got McDonald's, brought it back to the hotel room. And then I turned on the TV, and one of my favorite shows was on television called The Streets of San Francisco with Michael Douglas, although it was in German with English subtitles. But by then, Ray wanted to go to sleep, so Ray slept in the bathtub that night. Do you remember that, Ray?
Yeah, I do. I don't remember sharing the bed with you, but I remember sleeping in the bathtub.
Yeah. And
lots of women have said that too.
yeah. And then I'll just say one more thing about probably the most important paper that Ray's ever published. And I don't even, it's so important, Ray doesn't even have it on his CV. But he published this paper in Psychological Reports in 1987. And it's called Historical Items in the MMPI, Note on Evaluating Treatment Outcomes for a Criminal Population. And I'll just read part of the abstract because it's quite brilliant. The present study investigated the possibility that the sometimes reported absence of significant differences in the MMPI scores of a criminal population with and without treatment could be attributed partly to the unsuitability of the MMPI as a measure of change. Specifically, it was hypothesized that a large proportion of items used to diagnose criminality refer to completed and irrevocable past events, and therefore insensitive to changes brought about by treatment. The point being that it's impossible for there to be a change on those items. And I think you actually accidentally discovered that the first author had published the paper, but for some reason, you didn't want to put it on your CV.
Because I thought somebody must have published this before. It's such a glaring thing. Somebody somewhere must have written about it. That's why.
Yeah, because psychologists never screw things up.
But anyways, I mean, I would say over the years, Ray and I have become great friends. We live in the same neighborhood. I used to drive him home from the Clark, where we'd spend lots of time gossiping, and we've shared a lot of experiences over the years. We were discussing recently how I told Ray, you know, that I still have PTSD from my execution, except it's limited to dreams, recurrent dreams. And Ray's told me how after I was executed, he started to have nightmares of being fired, even though he had retired 10 years earlier. So we've had a variety of shared experiences.
Okay, I just want to say one thing about Ken very quickly before we move on to Maxine, because I really would like to hear from, haven't talked to Maxine in a while. I remember the first words Ken and I ever spoke. In those days, large institutions like hospitals would have, they might have been called mainframe computers. They were really mini computers, but people would call them mainframes. At any rate, there was a room which had terminals in it. So if you were going to do your computing, you had to go to this room and you with the terminals at it. And the first time I ever saw Ken, he was sitting at one of those terminals and somebody was giving me a tour of the terminal room. And Ken looked up at me and said, I forget what, it wasn't SPSS, it was the other program that people used to use, B something, I forget what it was.
BMC.
BMC, and he said,
BMDP.
BMDP. And Ken said something about it didn't have Yates correction for chi-squares on it. And I had an anxiety attack thinking, Yates corrections for chi-squares. I remember that. Oh my God, everybody here knows more than I do. I'm going to be a total failure. How am I going to possibly manage when just people are just making casual conversation about Yates correction, and I can barely remember that this exists. And it was like, you know, so unnerving to me that I can still remember that these were the first words we ever spoke were about Yates correction. Okay, that's all I have to interject.
One more very quick question, and then we'll go to Maxine. Really quick. Ray, has Ken ever made a correction in one of your reference sections?
Well, I got kind of rebellious when they started messing around with how many authors you have and the ellipses and blah, 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 blah. And at some point, I just decided, the hell with this. I don't want to have to look up how many names do you put and then how are the ellipses done exactly and whatnot. So he might have corrected something like that.
We will have a discussion at the end of this session about which one of you two is potentially more obsessional. Okay. Maxine, to you.
Yeah, I only have one brief comment to talk about Ray, and that was about 10 years after I came to work at the Clark as it was then. It was my 10-year anniversary, and there was a big sort of universal meeting up in the cafeteria on the top floor of campus.
And your work anniversary.
Pardon me?
And your work anniversary.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I had transitioned from male to female at that point, a couple of years before that, maybe a year before that, I'm not sure, just a year. Anyway, there were a fair number of nerves on my part at this, getting this 10-year sort of pin from the Clark. And there was a big audience, and Ray just introduced me by saying, Maxine used to be a redhead, but she decided she'd rather be a blonde. And it just cut all the anxiety from me, and I think from everybody else as well. And I'll never forget it, because it was so significant to me that he could say something like that, could just break all the ice. Really, it's the sense of humor that Ray has that has endeared him to everybody here, I think, along with his research skills, of course, but it's Ray's personality, his kindness that I really value. And that's all I have to say.
Great.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I remember that episode you're talking about. I put an enormous amount of thought and planning into making it seem off the cuff, but I agonized over it.
It did seem off the cuff.
But yeah, and it worked. And it worked because everybody wanted to be comfortable and everybody liked you and everybody wanted things to be okay. So it was just a matter of finding a framing that could make everybody heave a deep breath and relax and regard and know how to approach this as something that would allow humor and didn't have to be talked about in hushed tones and with such nerves.
But Ray, I'm not sure anybody else could have done it as well as you did.
Well, that's kind of you to say.
It's true.
Oh, I have one more thing. This is a good little story. Many years ago, my daughter, who is much younger, was criticizing me as usual. And I said to her, you know, what are the 3 most important things in my life? And what I wanted her to answer was her brother, and her mother. And she thought about it for a few seconds and she said, your work, your computer, and Ray. And there's another story about my daughter and Ray, but if this is being recorded, we can't discuss it.
Oh.
It is. We can record it later, although the FBI is probably recording. But anyway, I'll be next. So Ray, before you wrote it this morning, I had not remembered our phone conversation before we met in person in Barrie, and guessing it had to do with your gender nonconformity, female gender nonconformity scale, though I don't know. So I want to just talk about two important ways that you've influenced my life. I'll start with the less important, which is my research. And, you know, I can't think of anybody who's been more influential on my research career. And, you know, that our first conversation would have been about your gender nonconformity scale applied to sexual orientation and not anything to do with trans, because that came later. And you're so modest that I didn't really know about autogynephilia till a few years later. And that, of course, had an influential, a huge influence on my career, and it should be on the entire field. And that's why I was incensed enough to write the book that I have no regrets about, and will continue to research and talk about autogynephilia for the rest of my career and beyond. I started earlier to go through all of my publications and count the ones where I cited you, but that would have been really painful. I'm pretty sure it's over half, well over half. And those that were, you know, strongly influenced by you were a substantial proportion. The second thing I'll mention is simply what a pleasure it's been to get to know you as a person, as a friend, as a co-attendee of mainly ISR. I suppose we spent more hours together there than anywhere else. And you are positively delightful in those. Any of you who's not sat by Ray during an ISR session, especially one that's not very good, you must do it. You must do it. And it also, in thinking about this, it kind of gave me a positive take on things.
Mike,
because
I'm sorry, but I have to. I have often referred to Ray and Ken as the Statler and Waldorf. Remember the two old men in the Muppet Show?
No, I don't remember, James, because I'm too old for Muppets. But
you'll get there soon.
Okay.
I remember. I know what you're talking about, James. So they're up on the balcony, right? And they,
Okay.
Yeah, they're making fun of everything on stage.
Mike, I wanted to say, in front of
wait, Ray, I'm not done.
Okay.
You can. I do want to say that in thinking about our history together, it kind of made me optimistic in the sense that there have been some really negative times for sex research and ISR in particular, but sex research generally. In 1991 in Barrie, the hot thing was recovered memories of sexual abuse. There were true believers there giving talks, Gail Wyatt and John Breer and so on. And that ended, at least the first phase. Maybe we're getting a second. There's been, social construction that was probably overlapping, but a little later. And I remember sitting by you when that was happening. There's been all the sessions about how we must spend lots of government funding teaching gay men that they should wear condoms. You know, there have been other times as well, and yet we've gotten through all of those. And despite the fact that I am more negative than I can remember, I am hopeful based on that we can get through this. But that we have at least figuratively sat next to each other during this crisis, and hearing what you had to say has been very important to me. So thank you. Thank you for being an inspiration, and thank you for being my friend.
That's really nice to hear, Mike. I'm very touched by it, and I'm very appreciative of it. And you certainly have had a very big influence on my work as well. You're a recognized researcher, and everybody knows how important your work has been, but I want to interject one thing here about something that you mentioned, and that has to do with autogynephilia. One of the hidden researchers here, one of the hidden contributors is Maxine, because Maxine was such a good interviewer that if I didn't see a patient, or if the patient wasn't forthcoming when they saw me, I could read Maxine's notes on the patient and what Maxine had gotten from the patient about their fantasies, about their sexual behavior, about their romantic histories. And Maxine, as I said, I want to say this before witnesses, Maxine was really a huge contribution to my thinking and theorizing about autogynephilia by virtue of being such an excellent clinical interviewer and of having a good feel for that group of patients.
Thank you, Ray.
And I actually, now that you said that, I remember when I was doing research for my book, I visited you and I sat in on an interview with a gender patient, and Maxine was the interviewer. And I remember that it was not clear whether this person was autogynephilic or not going in for various reasons. And then afterwards, Maxine and I looked at each other and we said autogynephilic. And I felt very proud that we agreed.
I remember that.
Yeah. Okay, Tony, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Ray, like Mike, you've had an enormous impact on my career in terms of my research trajectories. So yeah, just a few stories, I guess. When I first met Ray, it was fascinating finding out about the work that he was doing when I visited the Clark the first time. Yeah, and didn't get the Shirk postdoc the first time, and I think I went back and was talking to Ray again, and then we tried again, and then finally got it, and it was great. And then after a couple of months working with Ray, I decided to go on sabbatical. And that worked out very well for 6 months, so that was good. So that was nice. I guess one of the highlights certainly for me in terms of the research career with Ray was certainly us doing the first older brother study. I remember driving around to different organizations and collecting data from heterosexual men, and that was an interesting, fascinating experience. So that was cool. I remember an ISR once where I was, I think maybe my first one with Ray, and I didn't share a bed and I didn't share a room, but I remember actually, I asked Ray if he wouldn't mind actually giving me a wake-up call, because I forgot my alarm clock. And as a good postdoc supervisor, he gritted his teeth and said, okay, I'll do that. But grow up, dude. I don't know if you remember that, Ray.
No.
No, but you did it. So you actually, yeah, gave me a wake-up call for one of the sessions. So that was great, actually. Anyway, enormous impact on my career, Ray. I remember as well, you know, when we were first starting out the serological study, us driving around, going to different wet labby oriented companies and so on and so forth, feeling a little lost also in terms of how we're supposed to end up doing this. And then we ultimately had Chow Wang come on board from U of T, which really stimulated me in terms of giving me some confidence to start up a wet lab, even though I'm a social psychologist, basically. And then absolutely Malvina came on board, and she was so helpful. And that was wonderful too. Yeah, and I remember our first participant, I think it was Chow, myself, and Malvina who went to the first mother. And that was, yeah, a watershed event. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And Ray, you were so supportive. You were so helpful. You were obviously at, you know, in Toronto at the time, so it was difficult for you to participate in terms of physically being there, but in terms of the amount of work you did, the amount of thought involved, so extremely supportive. So I just want to say thank you. I just want to say congratulations, happy birthday. And you know what? You are always the senior author, even though, for example, you're still only 75. So there you go. So anyway.
Well, thank you very much. And I could not have done, I could not have done what I did. We did together the birth order stuff. I mean, that was a real synergistic kind of situation. And so you had a huge impact on me too, because I would never have gone that far into that topic, you know, and some of your work on it was just so enormously important, like your study of biological versus non-biological older brothers was a hugely important piece of work. And the incredible scrambling that you did, you and Malvina did, to get that study to get a sample of mothers of gay men and straight men, and then to develop assays and get that study run is just amazing. And I was at the time, and still am, enormously impressed that with having to scrape up resources, you managed to do such a groundbreaking piece of laboratory research. So thank you for your contribution, you know, to my own career, and thank you for your contribution to this research area.
Well, thank you again, Ray. Congrats.
Yeah, at the after party tonight, I'll tell people the story about how I think Ray stumbled upon birth order as a metric to study, but can save it for later.
Okay.
Okay, James.
I have uncharacteristically little to say, and part of it is show and tell. First, Ray did not merely influence me. Ray was the divine entity who touched the dust of my career and turned it into life. Yeah, I thought you might like that one. I had absolutely no background, my thought at the time was really to be working in the trans clinic as, you know, as an intern. To me, the entire time it was the first year, I think I was the first class at CAMH. I think it had just amalgamated as I got there.
That's
It might have
possible.
been the beginning of that. It might have been January of that year, and I arrived in September. My plan really was for the trans clinic. I was planning on being a sex therapist at the time. The trans clinic was logical. The sex behavior clinic was the only other vaguely related thing. But then it turned out, ooh, they're doing neat shit here. Now, of course, you know, knowing Ray, who is especially when you need him to be your professor, is an intimidating character. And of course, you know, when I needed to loop him in and say, ooh, you know, stay for a postdoc, you know, you always want Ray to like you, respect you. So it took a while, but an opportunity presented itself in a conversation where we were editing something on Word, you know, and we were changing the font to italics, and there was a punctuation mark, a comma. And Ray related the story of this always having annoyed him, that he could never tell if the word is in italics, is the attached comma italicized or set in Roman? Not on purpose, without hesitating. APA manual says the attached punctuation marks take on the font of the associated word. Ray gave me this look. I knew I won. Part 2 is show and tell, one of my most prized possessions. Anyone who has spent any time sitting in Ray's office might recognize his, do you remember it?
Yes.
Paperweight, yeah, it's that silly paperweight
the brass
thing.
Brass clothespin.
So of course, every supervision, every conversation sitting at Ray's table in his office was always playing with whatever my most prized possession. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much, James. As I've said to other people here who have contributed so much, you and I together made it pretty much, you and I together made it respectable for people to start examining pedophilia in terms of neurodevelopmental issues and brain scans. Before us, there was the odd person who maybe looked at some neurological factor in pedophilia, but it was really our MRI study, although it might be totally wrong, I don't know, but at least it made it respectable for people to start looking at pedophilia.
No, there was some stuff in front of us that we had to sweep up first. Remember Langevin?
Yeah, but his heart was in the right place. He just didn't take it very far, and it wasn't very influential. Okay, that's all I had to say there.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, well, I'll add to the chorus and say that you've been hugely influential. Perhaps the influence has been a bit more circuitous or indirect. I remember when we met, it was at Minot, it was in the dorms. You and Mike and Ken and Anne were standing sort of in a circle talking to each other at the end of the hall. And I wandered up and you were talking about autogynephilia, 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 autogynephilia. And I stood there nodding, trying to pretend like I knew what was going on. And then you all sort of disseminated and I said to Anne, what the hell is autogynephilia? And she pulled me aside. We went to a little lounge, and she explained it to me, and my head blew up. And yeah, I became convinced that unless one understands the concept of autogynephilia and homosexual transsexualism, you can't really understand the phenomenon at all. And obviously, recognizing that distinction became hugely important in terms of the human research that I went to go on and do first in Samoa and later in southern Mexico. But at the time, it would be 3 years before I would do any of that work. I was a monkey researcher at the time, doing work on Japanese macaques, lesbian Japanese macaques. So the other thing I wanted to say, well, there's just a couple other things. One thing I wanted to say, one of the things that really stuck with me, and I can't remember where you said this to me, but you impressed upon me the need to replicate. And you said, replicate, 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 replicate. And I remember how important that was for me, because I think back at the time that I began my faculty position, publishing a replication study was sort of seen as beneath a lot of people. I think it still is. It was seen as something that was just not very interesting and not very important. And so it was really important for me to hear that coming from you, that publishing replications was a really important part of how you do good science.
Do you know the number of birth order studies he would eventually replicate and publish?
Many, 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 many. And on the subject of birth order, I wanted to say that I do recall one of the high points of my career in terms of compliments was Doug and I published a paper together in Proceedings, and you said there were few papers that reading them gave you so much pleasure. So that was a huge, 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 huge compliment. I knew we must be doing something right. And the last thing I want to say is just maybe I'm a pessimist, but I feel like sex research is in a lot of trouble. And it's so important to have role models like you. So I'm incredibly grateful that there are people like you that are showing others how good science should be done. And I'm very grateful for that. So happy birthday, Ray.
Well, thank you. and I guess I would like to pay you a compliment, which is that not only do I respect you as a scientist and as an individual researcher, but I very much respect your accomplishments as a teacher and the number of excellent PhD students that you've produced. I think that's been a real contribution to Canadian sexology, and I think it's been a factor in what I regard as the fact that Canada punches well above its weight in the area of sex research, human sex research. And your teaching and your students have been a big part of that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's an excellent transition to the next speaker, and I guess maybe I consider the next few people as our youngsters contingent. You can decide whether you consider Doug to be a youngster. I do, since several of us were on his committees when he was a child. But Doug, you're next.
True. Okay, thank you. So happy birthday, Ray. Congratulations. Yeah, reflecting on your influence on my thinking and on my career, I can honestly say I think maybe the watershed moment in determining the direction I took my career was I was sitting in a lecture hall in fall of 2003, and the instructor was talking about the evolution of sexual motivation, and he got to homosexuality and basically threw up his hands and said, we don't really know. And then he said, but here's an interesting finding from the recent past, which was the 1996 study, Blanchard and Bogart, showing the fraternal birth order effect. And that was the first time it sort of dawned on me, like, if I was going to do a PhD on a topic and discover something new, that maybe this would be the topic to study. And at the time I was also interested in primatology. And so when I came across Paul's profile, it seemed like a natural fit. And then over the years also, I had kind of written papers in my subsequent classes that were focused on your articles with Ken on birth weight. And then meeting you at IASR was a total treat, especially because you were so incredibly warm and welcoming. I mean, that was, I mean, I think ISR in general was very welcoming of students, but like you in particular, you were willing to talk to me about ideas. And I was, you know, a first year master's student. And I really felt like you took what I had to say seriously. I don't know if you really did, but at least I felt that way. Yeah, and then even over the years, I know you wrote me reference letters for awards and for different things, and you're always very supportive. And those early birth order papers that Paul and I worked on, I mean, really what I would do is I would read what you had done, study your analyses, and then basically try to emulate that. And yeah, it worked. And it was cool to come to the CAMH when I was working with Ken, and then have the opportunity to work with both of you on more birth order studies and to work closely with you on analyses. And I'm always impressed by like how many tricks you are able to pull out of your sleeve. Were you like a magician at some point in time as well? Or is that something you said before, that you used to do magic?
No.
Okay. Sorry, that part I'm confusing with someone else then. But yeah, I'm always impressed with the tricks out of your sleeves. And like just yesterday, you shared another article where you came up with another one, and I'm sure it's not your last. And then, so that's the professional side. And then on the personal side, like when I moved to Toronto, I know Toronto's like a big place. You might think there's lots of people to be friends with, but actually people are pretty cliquey here. And so I actually got to spend a lot of time with you during my postdoc. And since beginning my professorship, I guess I've been like too busy, but I have missed being able to visit and like play chess and hang out. And we had a lot of good times and some sort of surreal times. I remember December 15th, 2015, you were the one who broke the news to me about Ken's execution. And, you know, it was just like comforting to be with you and to, you know, hear your perspective on it at that time. We also watched some Blue Jays playoff games at your place. And the most surreal night of my life maybe was I was at your place when Trump won the presidency. Just thinking like, am I in some other universe now? But yeah, it's, I think just that combination of really looking up to you as a role model but getting to know you. And I mean, you are so successful, like one of the leading sex researchers of your generation. And if you wanted to be an arrogant jerk, you probably could. And people would be like, that's fine, but you're...
He's going to get accused of it anyway, so we may as well.
Pardon?
He's going to get accused of it anyway, so we may as well.
Yeah, but I just don't think he's got it in him. I think that fundamentally he is down to earth, incisive, smart, very witty, very humorous person. And yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have gotten the chance to get to know you better, especially over the last few years. So happy birthday, Ray.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you've had to say. And you're a part of the Vasey stable. In fact, you're like sort of like the eldest son.
Okay. Amy.
Yeah, move on. I have to answer a text, but get to the next person. I'll take care of this in a second.
Okay. Amy, you're next.
All right. So as I said, I briefly met Ray in the hallway in Ottawa. I was kind of like, oh, this is Ray Blanchard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've read so many things that you've written. And I'm sure he doesn't remember it because I was just a grad student at the time. And but it was, obviously I remember it. But the first real conversation we had was when I interviewed at CAMH for my internship. And it was my last interview out of about 8. And it was the one I knew that I wanted even before going. So it was already, you know, a bit nerve wracking, and I'd been through all these interviews, and I go and I sit down and it's, so tell me about your research. And I was like, oh, this is different. This is not what anyone else at any of these other places has asked me. And I was like, yeah, I like this. So it was an intimidating interview because I don't think we talked anything about any of the clinical things that I had prepared. It was all about what are you doing in your research and what are you interested in and all of that. So it's, sort of set the stage for exactly what I was looking for. And my first solo interview with an offender, it was very, serious going into it with all the motivation of it. And by the way, I was also 27 when I started, so add that. But, it was, going through the whole report and, this happened and this happened and, so it just, I guess, set a tone for, that the work that we're doing was really important, but also like to have a, sort of dark sense of humor that carried through the 2.5 years that I was there. And with James and Maxine and Ken and everybody, probably without a doubt, really the most intellectually stimulating 2.5 years I've had in my career and my life, probably. And much of that due to working so much with you, Ray. But I guess I have to say too, like, really what I miss is the personal stuff. So the just the offhand comments and jokes that I'm not even, maybe you did know they were funny, I don't know. But and I wish I had written them down. James, you've been keeping a list, haven't you? Did we discuss that at one point?
Of jokes? No, I might have said that we should, but I don't think we ever did it.
We should have, yeah. So not even
the book
necessarily
of Blanchardisms or something.
Yeah, exactly. So just these kind of like offhand comments where it's just like, they're very funny in the moment and you think about it later and they're even funnier.
Like the photocopier.
What's that?
Like the photocopier. Ray's mantra for the photocopier, which never worked, was everybody together now, fuck, shit, and piss.
Yeah. So just little things like that. And also like having such unbelievable respect for someone who I then found out watched American Idol like, without fail. And so I never felt bad about watching True Blood after I knew that you also followed it. So, so I guess those are probably the things that I miss so much about working with you guys. And I guess it wouldn't have lasted much longer anyway for various reasons had I stayed. But yeah, I guess just have a lot of affection for you and miss chatting. And I'm so glad that I got invited to this to see everybody and see you this morning. So happy birthday.
Well, thank you. And I'm really glad you could be here. And I certainly have fond memories of your time when you were an intern and then a postdoc. And it happens not rarely that I get asked about something from somebody who emails me, people that I don't know email me. And a lot of times the answer has to do with, can be found in one of those 2 papers that you and I published together. And so it's not rare that in answer to some inquiry, I send out one of those lichens and whoever papers in answer for whatever their question was.
Well, and the hemophilia paper is still my top cited paper. So thank you also for that.
Oh yeah, right. Right. Yeah, you went over and you asked you went and spoke to some like pediatric endocrinologist or something to ask her, oh yeah, she rated the photographs, gave Tanner ratings to the photographs of our phallometric stimuli. Yeah. Yeah. See, I'm not totally deteriorated yet. I can still remember some details.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Okay. All right, Mike, I think we can move on.
Okay, Malvina.
Hi, Ray. Happy birthday. Sorry, I was a little bit late. My favorite memories with you are probably just hanging out. It's like every once in a while I get a text message from Ray, or I used to, and now I guess during COVID we can't really meet up anymore. And I'm like, I wonder what Ray, and then inevitably it's like, did you want to analyze some data together? Do you have this data file? We could analyze it. You can come over. We can go for lunch. Those are my favorite memories of you and I hanging out, analyzing data. And I think also one of my favorite memories was at ISR in Charleston, where you received the Richard Green Lifetime Achievement Award. I happened to somehow be sitting at your table I don't know how I got to be able to sit at your dinner table, and I remember being just in awe of, and being like feeling very honored being at your table and in your presence and seeing you get the Lifetime Achievement Award in Charleston. That was a very proud moment for me. And yeah, I guess for my career professionally, I mean, I was reflecting on it when I was walking home today, and I was like, 75, like what, I was talking to my best friend, like, what am I going to be doing at 75? Am I going to be like Ray, still publishing papers at 75? Or am I just going to be in some house being like, I don't want anything to do with academia? And I really hope that maybe I will be still publishing papers, but probably not. It's amazing that you're still publishing and you're still writing us emails and like getting us inspired to do more analyses and writing all these incredible insights, even 10 years after you've retired, after you say you're not going to do any more research. It's very inspiring and it's very motivating. And I think that is something that I will always, always think about and reflect on as I go through my career. And obviously the serological study was such a huge thing for me and my career. And it was just an amazing journey that we went on. And I'll never forget, that study was like kind of like a beast in some ways, because you felt during some parts of that study that you just like didn't want to do it anymore. You're just like, screw this, like it's so much work. Who cares about where the mothers are coming from? I don't want to do this anymore. And then like you'd get an email from Ray, and it would just be so motivating to keep going on and keep continuing on with the study. It was very helpful. And our first participant was December 9th, 2011. I found the email. I sent you a copy of it just maybe like an hour ago. So that's a day that I will probably never forget in my life. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you so much and happy birthday. And I hope that we'll get to share many more birthdays.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so we're getting toward the end, and just want to point out how many intellectual older brothers these last two have had. I don't know what consequence that would have.
Last three, because Kevin has to go too.
Right, yes. So last three, yeah. So I think Kevin would be next.
Yes, thank you. And happy birthday, Ray. You look great. And thanks for inviting me to help celebrate your 75th. It's a real honor. So I had all these remarks prepared about how brilliant Ray is as a researcher and scholar, and how much we love reading his writing, which is always sharp. Because I actually didn't know who was going to be in the call, so I didn't. But everyone here is very familiar with Ray's research and impact, so I don't need to flatter you too much today. But yeah, Mike, do you mind if I put on I have some slides, some pictures.
Go for it. You should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully people can see that. So that was the first time, I believe, that I met you, Ray. It was at the International Academy of Sex Research Conference, my very first academic conference in LA, 2011. And I think, as Scott mentioned, I looked way different back then, and I didn't know what I was doing in terms of fashion or anything, but we can ignore that. But at that time, I was pretty, what was the phrase that Scott used? Green and what was it? Wet behind the ears? Did I get that right? Yeah, so I was a little intimidated. So I don't know if we really had too much interaction at that conference, because at that point I was just trying to I was meeting like everybody. I think that's the first time I met Ken. I don't know if I met Paul there, or Tony or James, but there was a lot. I was meeting a lot of people. I was still an undergrad. I was applying to graduate school that fall. So, but even at that point, Ray, you had played like a really big role in influencing the direction of my research and ultimately my career, which all of which would not be possible without you and the groundwork that you laid. I was introduced to your work through Mike, who was my research mentor throughout undergrad and graduate school. And some of my earliest projects were on gynandromorphophilia and autogynephilia. That was the thrust of my senior thesis, which you helped kind of develop in a way. So I was reading a lot of your work. I think I had probably read all of your papers at that point that you had published to date. And the rest was kind of history from there. In graduate school, Ray, you continued to be a great mentor and support of mine. We did this symposium together, if you remember, in 2015. That was really fun. And you were the discussant on a symposium on erotic.
Yeah, I remember that.
You were also a good sport when it came to this thing where we came up with Blanchard philia. So that was a fun time. I think we snuck these photos, I think at Puzzles, the Puzzles conference a month before IESR. More evidence of Ray's great sense of humor. So after that, Ray, you were also on my dissertation committee, and you made my thesis immeasurably better. It was on erotic target identity inversions in furries, adult baby diaper lovers, and eunuchs. So you were nice enough to kind of help out with that. It was kind of I guess, 3 very unusual populations. I got my PhD, and Mike did attend, and Ray, you actually flew in. And we had a really nice dinner together, I think, in Evanston.
Hey, Kevin, you're still sharing your screen. Do you mean to?
Oh, oops. That is other stuff. Hold on. There we go. Yes, I guess it was on the wrong screen. Right. I'm using like 2 monitors, and that makes it.
Right. Okay.
So that was us in 2017 when we flew Ray out for the first time to Evanston. This was my, I guess this was the dissertation proposal defense. And this was just last year when we flew Ray out again in April and had a really nice time. And I got my PhD, so that's nice. Thanks to, in large part to your help. And I also remember we had a really nice conversation. I think we drove in like the snow, and I think we were a little worried whether your flight would have been delayed, because I remember there was this really big snowstorm in the middle of April, but it's Chicago, so that just happens, I guess, in the middle of April. I think that was probably the last time that we met up in person, and so I really do look forward to the next time that we can do that. And of course, without your help and writing me letters of recommendation and reference letters for all sorts of academic positions, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm eternally grateful for that, and for all of the work that you have done for this field that has influenced me. And I hope to continue to publish in this domain, and to hopefully let your legacy live on, if you will, if it hasn't already. I mean, you've been a huge inspiration for me and to a lot of people on this call in very different ways. I mean, people have worked with you in all different kinds of contexts, clinically, working with pedophiles, working in terms of autogynephilia, fraternal birth order effects. So you've already had so much influence on just this group of people on this call in making the field of sexuality research a lot better, and making the world a lot better. And so happy birthday. And I hope that, your legacy continues to live on in all of us. And we look forward to the next time that we can meet in person.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm not good at multitasking, clearly. So I'm just gonna stop the sharing before anything else embarrassing comes up. Not that I think it's embarrassing came up.
All right, Scott.
All right. I feel like I have a lot less to say than a lot of other people, and I in many ways envy that because they've had so much more time to spend with Ray and being influenced by Ray. And kind of like Doug, I came up looking often at Doug's papers, but then tracking back through the literature to understand, well, what should I be doing, and would land on your approach. And I came to really admire your very meticulous commitment to empiricism. And I think we've all kind of mentioned things that are similar to that. But I was very struck, kind of like Malvina, at the graciousness that you carried yourself with at ISR in receiving that award, and just the decency with which you conduct yourself. And it made me highly motivated then to kind of use my position as a student rep to interview you or do a brief interview for the newsletter, because I wanted kind of my peers to see that and see it as so desirable, not only scientifically to strive the way that you did for accuracy and for truth and for replicability, but also to be decent in the way and that you go about that and understated rather than overstated. So yeah, I feel like I've gotten this very cool opportunity to have a few master classes in not only scientific conduct but personal conduct, and watching you work on the paper that you were gracious enough to include Francisco and Paul and I on is extremely appreciated. And I doubt that I will be as sharp or as productive at 35 as you are at 75. And so I'm very proud to be in any way affiliated with you, and very appreciative of that. So happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, and so to the baby, Francisco.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here, even if it's just to be a fly on the wall, but I'm glad I get to talk for a bit. Obviously, being the last person talking, I'm the one that has the less experience with Ray. But that said, like I said earlier, first time we communicated was over email in 2017. But I want to provide a little bit of context before that, talking about that quickly. So I just want to go back quickly to 2015. It was my first conference. It was Puzzle Conference. And the week before Puzzle, I just moved in to Canada. I've moved from Puerto Rico to Canada, so I was fresh off the boat. And a week later, I was in this conference where I actually met most of the people here, listening to like groundbreaking research. And meanwhile, I was just thinking, like, did I say my name right earlier? Like, I can't remember. So very different, priorities. But before I actually got to see the presentation that most of the people here gave, I think, or talk about the research, I actually was able to talk to them just normal conversation. So I was able to meet most people here as people first, and then as researchers as the years have gone by, and I've read more about their work. But with Ray, it has been sort of like in the opposite direction, where after Puzzles, I started reading more and more and more about pretty much everybody's work here. And, as I was reading, I was like, these people seem like a big deal. And so when I finally was able to talk to Ray and communicate with Ray over email, I was pretty nervous. And it was actually, I think, the first time, other than maybe Doug, the first time I was sharing my work with someone, and not in a like publishing way, like submitting for publication, but sharing my work with somebody. And so we were talking, and the way you responded to me and the emails, I had the sensation that I was not really being talked to as a student, but as as a colleague, perhaps. And I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but that's the sensation I felt. And to have that feeling for the first time from such an established researcher was really formative for me, and sort of maybe even, I would say, motivate me to just keep going, because I was like no longer necessarily felt as a student, but as a researcher. So that was this. I'm really grateful for that. And so since then, you know, we've been emailing about some stuff, and most recently about, as Scott said, a paper that we published recently, and I was so grateful that gave me that opportunity to collaborate with you, but most importantly for me, to see the process of your work. And, you know, from like seeing first manuscript, the response to reviewers, and just seeing that attention to detail and you know, like just like the dedication and all that. And also that was very educational for me. And I'm just grateful for that. And I guess I'll just leave it with thank you for all that. Thank you for giving me that experience. And most importantly, I suppose, thank you for providing me a role model to look up to. And I can only hope that the work I do from now on can sort of mirror in any possible way, yeah, the type of work that you do. So thank you very much, Ray. And I'm really happy I finally got to see you face to face.
Well, thank you for your comments. And I hope that when COVID is finally over, and if and when Paul reschedules the Puzzles Conference, I'll get to come out to Lethbridge for at least one more time, and that we can meet in person at last.